All right. I've had so many questions over the last couple of weeks. We're going to dig in, okay? I have been asked to do this very slowly. I will do my best. If we don't finish today, we will pick up where we left off next week. This is too important. Our world is in chaos. And as Christians, we're looking at the Bible and we're looking at the world and we're saying to ourselves, what's happening? Could this be it? How does this all play out? If you watch the news, you're going to hear terminology that you're thinking to yourself, I think I know what that means, but do you really? So we're going to look at this scenario in a couple different ways. We're going to look at the promises, because God makes a lot of promises. We're going to look at the history, and I might take the history and the people and separate them. I'm not quite certain yet. I've already got, I think, 3.5 pages of notes, single space for next week. We might split them up. Then we're going to look at the prophecy. On May 14, 1948, the Jewish People's Council met in Tel Aviv to declare Israel a state. How many of you remember that? I knew some of y'all would be around going, whoa, yeah, I remember that. There has been great unrest in the Middle East ever since. In fact, the day after they make that declaration, what happened? They all attacked him. The unrest exists under many different claims. And we're starting to see those in the news right now. We have people protesting the streets, making claims that are 100% false, but they're too naive or uneducated to know the difference. They were just told something by a professor or somebody who hated Israel somehow, and now they're jumping up and down with picket signs. Opponents reject the rightful existence of Israel. That's what it boils down to. And they like to see it destroyed, removed. Our goal is not to get stuck in the weeds of end times prophecy as a study. I know some of you love that, but the fact is I have 5 systematic theology books in my office by amazing scholars. What all that means is this: each book is about this thick, and the font is like 10. Okay, 2 out of 5 agree. So we all want to run around and act like we know what's going to happen? No, we shouldn't. There are things that we know of in times that are absolutely fact. They all agree on those things, but there are certain things, nuances that are slightly different. So our goal is not to get hung up in the weeds of end times prophecy, but instead to build an understanding of the significance of Israel and God's promises in the Bible, to develop an unbiased understanding of the history of the nation of Israel and its region, to understand the people and develop a basic understanding of end times prophecy as it relates to Israel. Lastly, we will put it all together and discuss what it means to us here in Boulder City, in Henderson, in Las Vegas, and the world beyond. You starting to hear the professor side of me coming out? That would have been an introduction statement, you know. Now, I'm going to be completely upfront with everybody here. I am not an end-time scholar. Nor do I spend exorbitant amount of time studying this issue. And maybe I should spend more time studying. I'm spending a lot of time studying. In fact, if you know my schedule this last week, I cut as much time out of my church schedule as possible just to be in the books. Just for today. And for next week and the week after. So let's dig in, shall we? God is a promise keeper and makes many promises to Israel. God is a promise keeper and makes many promises to Israel. We need to start there. Because in order to understand all that's taking place in the Middle East, you need to start at the very beginning. David Jeremiah writes these words. He says, there are 3 parts to promise making: the promise itself, the character of the promise maker, and the keeping of the promise. Would you all agree that those 3 main elements must exist for us to believe in a promise? Have you ever had someone make a promise to you who's never kept a promise to you before, and you're like, yeah, right. Maybe you had a child who asked you for money. I'll pay you back. Maybe that car dealer says, yeah, we'll take care of that. Who are you again? See, when the character of the one making the promise is good and true, there's comfort, there's confidence in that promise. Why? Because I trust that person's character. You got to have character. As human beings, your character is based on how you live your life, how you engage. Your character. Then we have the promise itself. Is it reasonable? Is it possible? Is there history with this person coming through with even the seemingly impossible things? As parents, we need to be really careful. As adults, we need to be careful that we make promises we know we can keep. Have you ever met someone who makes absorbent or huge promises and you're like, there's no way you can keep that? I know as a child I heard this promise a few times from a certain parent. If you do that again, I will kill you. Now, as a little kid, I believed him. Just so you know. I will bury you in the backyard. Take you out the horse pasture. I don't know. So we got to make sure that the promise itself is reasonable and possible based on the person making the promise. Then finally, we have the fulfillment of the promise. Now, we don't necessarily even have to say, I promise to make a promise. For example, if I said, hey, let's meet this week and let me buy you coffee. Is that a promise? Would you expect to meet me this week and me be like, are you catching the bill or not? That would be a broken promise. Why? Because I invited you to meet with me for coffee. I want to buy you coffee. Let's sit down and talk. It's a problem. I don't have to say, I promise to buy you coffee if you meet with me today. No, just, hey, let me buy you coffee. That's a promise. It's unspoken, but it's a promise. So we have the fulfillment of promise. And what we need to understand is that the promise may take some time to fulfill. Some promises are short term, such as, let's meet and let me buy you coffee. It's short term. Some promises are long term. I will never treat you this way. Or, when you graduate from high school, I will buy you a car. You might be saying that to a sixth grader, You better start saving because they're going to hold you to that. You see, we can make short-term promises. We can make long-term promises. When God makes promises, they are long-term. You see, God is a promise keeper. His character, His actions, and His history demonstrates that when He makes a promise, it doesn't matter how impossible it might seem, when God promises, it will come to pass. He's a promise keeper. God kept promises to Abraham. One of the most sacred individuals in the Jewish history, in Israel's history. Genesis chapter 12 says this, verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house, to a land I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. That includes us. That's a long-term promise. And to this day, we are blessed. We're reading about Abraham's journey. We're reading about his faith. We can look at his life and we can glean from that. Not just from the lessons learned, but from his heritage. See, God must promise to bless the world through Abraham. God promised that his descendants would even suffer by the way. Can you imagine having God come up to your life and say, so I just want to let you know that your family, they're going to suffer for the next 500 years. What? But you're a God of blessing. Well, yeah, I am a God of blessing, but I'm going to use, some of this stuff to get you to where I need you to be. So, for example, God promised that Abraham's descendants would suffer in slavery for 400 years, but would be delivered after that period of time and given the promised land. Now, if you've ever watched VeggieTales, there's a song that's bouncing through your head right now. I'm sorry for putting that there. Genesis chapter 15, verse 13. Then he said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterwards they shall come out with great possessions. Let me put this promise in context for you. You have a certain man goes to Israel. He's a slave. Who we're talking about? But no yet. He was a servant. He was sold into slavery. He worked in a certain person's house, and then his wife said, oh, you got it, Joseph. Thrown into prison, interprets the king's dream, ends up being the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. And if the timeline works, about 30 years he served in that role. But then the Bible says there came a king who did not know him. So what happened in Egypt? Exodus chapter 1, verse 8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, Look, the people of the children of Israel are more than mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities. Here's the amazing thing about God's promise. God makes all kinds of promises. But at this point, Abraham and Sarah didn't even have a child. Hey, I'm going to make your family great, make your heritage great. You're going to bless all families, all nations. Oh, by the way, all of your kids are going to basically go into slavery for 400 years. But the amazing thing about the story is the Bible tells us that when the children of Israel left Egypt, when the great Exodus took place, the Egyptians sent with them all kinds of treasures, all kinds of things, and the nation of Israel was massive. It was a time where God used them to strengthen their faith, and prepare them for what lie ahead. And I'm going to say this, I want you to remember this thought process, because when we get to the history next week, it's going to be important. When Israel left Egypt, it wasn't just the Jewish people. There were non-Jews who went with them. Why? Because they were believers of Yahweh. Genesis chapter 17, verse 15. Here's another promise. Then God said to Abraham, As for Sarah your wife, you shall not call her by the name of Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name, and I will bless her and also give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples shall be from her. They had no kids at this point. And really, if you know the story, Sarah basically hears his promise and laughs. I'm an old woman. Some of you right now are going to go home and be like, I sure hope that doesn't happen to me. I got no energy. God is a promise keeper. He made promise after promise and made no sense. It was seemingly impossible to Abraham. He made promises that Abraham couldn't even possibly comprehend. But yet he kept every one of them to Abraham. God committed to Israel, God's chosen people, a promised land. And he promised them that promised land, that it would be theirs forever. That's a very important point. The promised land would belong to the children of Israel forever. And as we look at the history of Israel next week, we will learn that there are points in history's life where Israel is they're allowing for sin into their lives and their families and all this other stuff. So God will judge them and let them be scattered abroad, but then eventually brings them back. Why? Because God used that kind of judgment to help get through to them. Listen, I am your God. I will allow no other gods in your life. You will serve me. One end-time prophecy that we know to be absolute fact is that after God delivers Israel, God gives them a new heart, and all of Israel will follow after God. All the Jews. It's a promise we know to be true. We can understand. All the scholars agree. God committed to Israel a promised land forever. Genesis chapter 15, verse 18. On the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants, I will give this land from the river Egypt to the river, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. The Kenites and the Kezites and the Cadmonites, the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Rephaim, the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Girgashites and the Jebusites and every other ite that was there. He says, hey, that's who's living there right now. We're going to kick them all out. I'm going to give you the promised land. All right, here it is. We're going to the promised land. I'm going to give you a promised land, and that land will be yours. This is my promise to you, Abraham. God promised Abraham that the descendants would be given this land forever. We will see that in just a moment. This is a geographical portion of the Abrahamic covenant. God made a covenant with Abraham. And what's amazing about this covenant made by God with Abraham is this. Normally in a covenant situation, all the parties involved would participate in the covenant, and it basically was like a contract saying, if you do this, then I will do this. No, in this case, God makes the promise to Abraham, and God himself, no one else, seals the covenant, meaning this. It doesn't matter what you do, Abraham. Doesn't matter what the people do. Doesn't matter what Israel does. Understand this. I have made this promise to Israel, and I will keep it because I am a covenant maker and a covenant keeper. He's a promise keeper. Now the Lord said to Abraham, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make your name a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all families of earth shall be blessed. So Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken to him. And Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old. Can you imagine 75 years going, I think I'm just going to leave everything behind and start over? And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife and Lot his brother's son and all their possessions that they had gathered and the people, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan, and Abraham passed through the land to a place of Shechem, and as far as the terebinth tree of Morah. And the Canaanites were then in the land. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land. What land? The land of Canaan. And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. Who promised to give Canaan to Israel? God. Abraham's descendants, Israel. Some scholars believe this promise was made around 2,100 years before Jesus was even born. 2,100 years before Jesus was born, God's making a promise to Abraham saying, hey, this land of Canaan, this is your land. I am giving you this land. One day you'll possess it. Your descendants will possess it. It's your land. This will be yours. This is my promise to you. What gives God the right to give away land already inhabited by the Canaanites? He made it. It's his. It's all his. Here's what the psalmist declares. The earth is the Lord's. Any questions? The earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. Any more questions? The earth is the Lord's and all its fullness, the world and those dwell therein. Because God is the creator, he's the rightful owner of all of his creation. That involves us too. God says, hey, Abraham, I think I'll give you this little piece of land here for your descendants. It'll be yours. It's going to be called the Promised Land. Psalmist, again, 135, verse 6. Whatever the Lord pleases, he does in heaven and in earth, in the seas and in the deep places. You see, God has the authority to do whatever he wants to do on planet Earth. Taking away their land was actually part of God's judgment on the Canaanites. The Canaanites, they worship false gods. And God says, I'm going to judge the Canaanites because of their sin and their evilness. Here's Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 4. Do not think in your heart after the Lord your God has cast them out before you, saying, because my righteousness the Lord has brought me into this to possess this land. But it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out from before you. It is not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you go in to possess their land, but because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord your God drives them out from before you, and that he may fulfill the word which the Lord swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Abrahamic covenant was unconditional. It was not reliant on the people remaining faithful to God. God would still keep his promises no matter what. Now, again, Israel's unfaithfulness would eventually lead to persecution and being scattered abroad and much more, but the land was still a promise from God that was forever, would never be revoked. God repeated the promise to Moses even between 1445 BC and 1405 BC. Somewhere in there, God makes another promise to Moses, and here's what he says. I'm giving you dates on purpose. Make sure you're writing them down. Between 1445, the time that we believe the Exodus took place, and 1405, because it's counting down because we're getting to 0 where Jesus is born, right? 1405, God makes his promise again to Moses. Therefore say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. I will make you as my people, and I will be your God. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will bring you into a land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as a heritage. I am the Lord. Now, anytime God ends a statement with I am the Lord, he's trying to remind the readers that, listen, I have spoken. You don't get to have an opinion on this. I have spoken because I am the Lord. It's a promise with great authority. Joshua led Israel to take the promised land from the Canaanites around 1405 BC. What's the date? Around 1405 BC, before Christ was born. Joshua chapter 21, verse 43. So the Lord gave to Israel all the land which he had sworn to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it to dwell in it. The Lord gave them rest all around, according to all that he had sworn to their fathers, and not a man of all their enemies stood against them. The Lord delivered all their enemies into their hand. Not a word failed of any good thing which the Lord had spoken to the house of Israel. All came to pass. What does all mean? all. Now, what did the promised land look like on a map? I tried to put a map up here this morning. It did not work. But all of you, maybe if you kind of think, you've been seeing on the news, kind of what the map looked like, I want you to understand something about the promised land. It started with the river dividing the promised land, Canaan, from Egypt, way down south. It ended at the Euphrates River, way up north. That means that all of these surrounding areas, Jordan, Syria, and all these other places all around them, they are actually the occupiers, by the way, on God's promised land. Isn't that amazing how when you take history and actually look at it, you suddenly realize that, wait a minute, the world is believing a lie. God made and kept every one of the promises he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God promised David, a teenage shepherd, that he would one day be king of Israel. Yet another promise. Guys, remember King David when he first came on the scene? He's out there fighting lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, right? Protecting little lammies from getting eaten. He's such a small piece of this family that when the prophet comes to anoint the next king, they don't even bother calling him out of the fields. God's promise. 1 Samuel chapter 16 now. And Samuel said to Jesse, are all your young men here? Then he said, there remains yet the youngest, and there he is, keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down till he comes. So he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is the one. Then Samuel took the horn of the oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel arose and went to Ramah. What's going on here? Samuel's anointing a kid to be king one day. He didn't come from a royal family. How on earth can he be king? We have a king. And hey, by the way, he's got kids. It's not how it works in culture. God says, no. I don't care. I'm going to make him king. He's going to be king. Now here's a promise that God made to David, a descendant of Abraham, by the way, that his descendants would sit on the throne of Israel forever. Wait a minute. If God promised that a descendant of Abraham, King David, would rule over, or that his family or lineage would rule over and sit in David's throne forever, how long is God's promise of the promised land going to last? Forever. Doesn't matter who's there, it's still God's promise to the people. 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12. When your days are fulfilled and you rest with your fathers, I will set your seed after you, and who will come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. This word forever actually means forever when God promises forever. Where was the throne of David? Jerusalem. That means that David's throne will last forever. That means that his lineage would forever sit on this throne. How long is the kingdom of Israel going to last? Forever. Do they have to be present for it to exist? It was promised them while Canaanites were there, long before they ever took it. Acts chapter 2, verse 29. Men and brethren, let me speak freely to you freely to you of the patriarch David, that he is both dead and buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. Therefore, being a prophet and knowing that God had sworn with an oath. Do you think an oath is a little more heavy than a promise? God swore with an oath to him that of the fruit of his body according to the flesh, he would raise up the Christ. Speaking of the Messiah, the Christ, to sit on his throne. He, foreseeing this, spoke concerning the resurrection of the Christ, that his soul was not left in Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption. This Jesus God has raised up, of which we are all now witnesses. Therefore, being exalted to the right hand of God, and having received from the Father the promise of the Holy Spirit, he poured out this which you now see and hear. For David did not ascend into heaven, but he himself, the Lord, said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. Therefore, let all the house of Israel, who? Israel, know assuredly that God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Christ. Jesus, one day, will sit on the throne of Israel. Where will it be? See, God promises that one day Jesus himself will sit on the throne of David in Jerusalem to rule and reign over Israel and the entire world. See, here's what we don't understand. Why has Israel always been such a big hot spot of crazy? Because that is the center of end times. That's where Jesus Christ himself will one day rule all. Let me ask you a question. Is there an enemy seeking to destroy God's plan? Yes. Do you think that Satan himself is involved in what's happening in Israel right now? Absolutely. Why? Because Israel's at the center of God's bigger plan. He wants to hurt the Jewish people. He wants to hurt the children of Israel. Why? Because they were God's chosen. God promised the land of Canaan to Israel. God gave the land to Israel. God insisted that the land would always rightfully belong to Israel. Now, anyone who says Israel is an occupier of the Palestinian territory, they do not know their history. If they knew ancient history, many who desire the destruction of Israel are actually the ones occupying Israel and Israel's promised land. And all Israel asks in return for their occupation is for them to live in peace with them. We're going to see, I think it's 5 different times Israel offers land in exchange for peace, and the response is war. Israel has all this land that God's promising. Listen, we'll give you this piece for peace. We'll give you this land for peace. Over and over and over again. The promised land belongs to God's people. One day God himself will sit on David's throne in Jerusalem and destroy any who oppose Israel. Anyone. So what do we do now? Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. Now the Lord has said to Abram, get out of your country from your family and from your father's house to a land I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. We need to stand with Israel. Because God's made a promise. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. Here's what the Bible says for us. Psalms chapter 122, verse 6. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. Oh, more blessings. Peace be within your walls, prosperity within your palaces. For the sake of my brethren and the companions, I now say, peace be with you. Because of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good. Scriptures teach us to pray for Israel. Pray for the peace and blessing of Israel. We're called to pray for the innocent lives to be spared, both in Israel and these Palestinian nations, these Muslim countries. There are a lot of innocent people stuck in the middle of this. Every one of them needs to hear of the good news of Jesus Christ. Every one of them. It's easy to say, I'm with Israel, destroy them all. Wait a second. Wait a minute. Not everyone wants to destroy Israel. We need to pray for them to come around to understanding who Israel is and the God of Israel. We need to pray for souls to be saved. We need to pray for peace. We need to pray for blessing. This week, we've seen the promised land, the promises of God. Next week, we're going to dig into the history. Bring a notebook. You're going to want it. Listen, we have a good God. We have a God who's in control. And even all the craziness that we currently see in the world around us, even in our own country, God can use all of that to accomplish His greater plan. And as Christ followers, we need to find rest, comfort, and peace in that. And what we need to do in all this crazy is to rest in His promises. He promises to bless those who bless Israel. He tells us to pray for Israel. He also tells us to pray for the lost. Do you believe a Muslim's lost? Absolutely. We need to pray for the lost. Ask God to work and intervene in such a way that the gospel will be declared to all and peace will be restored.